Home is supposed to be the safest place in the world. But for one Texas family, the son they loved and trusted most turned their house into a killing ground. This is the story of Thomas Bartlett Bart Whitaker, the son who orchestrated the murder of his own family in pursuit of greed and freedom. A case so shocking, it became one of the most infamous family betrayal crimes in American history. In Sugar Land, Texas, a quiet, affluent suburb of Houston, the Whitakers were known as a picture-perfect family. Kent Whitaker, a devoted father, had worked his way up in the oil industry. His wife, Patricia, was warm, compassionate, and deeply invested in raising their two sons. The younger son, Kevin, was bright, athletic, and close with his parents. He was just 19 years old, full of promise, and deeply loved. Then there was Bart, the eldest, a tall, charismatic young man who seemed to have every advantage. He attended Sam Houston State University, or so his parents believed. To neighbors, the Whitakers embodied suburban success. Two loving parents, two healthy sons, a secure future. But beneath this perfect surface, Bart carried a dark secret. By the early 2000s, Bart's life was spiraling. Unknown to his parents, he had dropped out of college years earlier. The classes, the degree, the graduation his family thought he was working toward, all of it was a lie. Bart spent his time drifting between friends, parties, and fantasies of independence. But the more he deceived his family, the more trapped he felt. With graduation approaching in December 2003, the web of lies was about to collapse. His parents had planned a celebration. Relatives and friends expected to see Bart walk the stage in his cap and gown. But Bart had nothing. No degree, no future, only lies. Instead of facing the truth, he devised a plan that would change everything forever. Kill his family, inherit their money, and start over with a clean slate. Bart didn't act alone. He recruited friends. First an acquaintance named Adam Hipp, who later backed out, horrified by the idea. But Bart didn't stop. He turned to another friend, Chris Brashear, a troubled young man whom Bart convinced to help him. The plan was cold, calculated, and chilling. On the night of his graduation dinner, Bart would take his family out to celebrate. When they returned home, an intruder would be waiting. Brashear would ambush them, shoot them all, and flee. Bart would stage his own injury to look like a victim. It was meant to look like a burglary gone wrong. But in reality, it was nothing more than a son engineering the murder of the people who loved him most. December 10, 2003. The Whitakers gathered for what they believed was a proud family moment. Bart had graduated, and his parents and younger brother took him out to dinner at a local restaurant. They laughed, toasted, and celebrated. Patricia, radiant with pride, Kent smiling warmly, Kevin teasing his big brother. No one knew that Bart had already set the wheels of death in motion. When they returned home, they walked through the front door into the darkened house. That's when Chris Brashear, armed and waiting, opened fire. The first shots struck Patricia and Kevin. Both collapsed, fatally wounded. Kent was hit next, the bullet tearing through his arm and chest, but he clung to life. Bart, playing his role, was grazed by a bullet in his arm. A staged injury to reinforce the illusion that he too had been a victim. The scene was chaos, filled with screams, smoke, and the smell of gunpowder. Within minutes, Patricia lay dying, Kevin gone, Kent bleeding heavily on the floor. The home invasion was complete. Kent was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Against all odds, he survived. But the worst wound wasn't physical, it was emotional. In the days following the murders, the Sugar Land community rallied around Kent. Vigils were held, flowers placed outside the family home, prayers offered for a man who had lost his wife and son in one night. To everyone, Bart seemed like a grieving son who had narrowly survived a horrific attack. He played the part well, crying with friends, holding his father's hand, and speaking to the media about his pain. But detectives began to notice cracks. Police initially investigated the case as a robbery, but nothing had been stolen. Expensive jewelry, electronics, cash, all untouched. Then came another red flag, Bart's behavior. Instead of appearing devastated, he quickly began making unusual financial moves and seemed oddly composed. Investigators dug deeper and uncovered Bart's double life. They discovered he had not been enrolled in college for years. The supposed graduation had been a complete fabrication. His lies unraveled piece by piece. Soon, friends came forward. Adam Hipp admitted Bart had once tried to recruit him for a murder plot. Others revealed Bart had spoken often about wanting his parents dead. The case was clear. The grieving son was actually the mastermind. But by the time police closed in, Bart was gone. Bart fled the country, making his way to Mexico. There, he lived under a false identity, working at a furniture store, blending into a small community. For more than a year, he evaded capture. Meanwhile, Kent, the father who had lost so much, held on to hope. He didn't want to believe his son was guilty. Despite evidence mounting, Kent defended Bart, insisting his boy couldn't have orchestrated the murder. But in September 2005, Bart was finally captured in Mexico and extradited to Texas. In 2007, Bart Whitaker stood trial for capital murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Testimony from co-conspirators, financial motives, and Bart's years of lies. The prosecution painted him as cold, calculating, and manipulative. Jurors listened to how he orchestrated the deaths of his mother and brother, how he deceived his father, and how he fled instead of facing justice. The verdict: guilty. Bart Whitaker was sentenced to death. For most, justice seemed clear. But the story did not end there. Kent Whitaker had lost his wife and younger son to Bart's plan. He had nearly lost his own life. And now, he faced the reality that his surviving son would be executed by the state. But instead of embracing vengeance, Kent chose forgiveness. He began a public campaign asking Texas to spare Bart's life. He argued that executing Bart would only deepen his wounds, that he had already lost enough. It was one of the most extraordinary displays of parental love and forgiveness in modern criminal history. The victim of Bart's betrayal became his greatest advocate. In 2018, after years on death row, Bart Whitaker's execution date arrived. He had eaten his final meal, said his goodbyes, and prepared for the end. Then, in a stunning, last-minute decision, Texas Governor Greg Abbott commuted his sentence to life in prison without parole, citing Kent's extraordinary plea for mercy. Bart remains in prison today, alive but forever marked as the son who destroyed his own family. The Whitaker case is remembered not just for the crime itself, but for the haunting questions it raised. How does a child turn against the people who gave them everything? How can greed and lies become stronger than love and loyalty? And perhaps most chilling of all, how does a father find it in his heart to forgive the very son who orchestrated his family's destruction? In the end, Bart Whitaker's story is not just one of betrayal and murder. It is a story of the unshakable love of a father, a man who, despite enduring the ultimate betrayal, chose forgiveness over vengeance. In the heart of Minnesota, in a quiet suburban home, the unthinkable happened. A 16-year-old boy, angry and defiant, picked up an axe, and within minutes, his family's laughter, their future, and their lives were gone. This is the story of David Brom, the boy who turned his own home into a slaughterhouse. The Brom family of Rochester, Minnesota, lived an ordinary, modest life. Parents Bernard Bernie Brom and his wife Paulette were raising their 4 children in a devout Catholic household. Their faith and values guided their daily lives. Bernie was known as a hard-working man, steady and disciplined. Paulette was warm and deeply devoted to her children. Together, they were raising 4 kids: Diane, the eldest daughter, David, a 16-year-old son, and 2 younger siblings, Rick and Jean. From the outside, the Broms were a normal American family, tight-knit, religious, and stable. But under the surface, their teenage son David was struggling with deep resentment and anger. By 1988, David was in high school and had begun rebelling strongly against his parents' strict Catholic values. He disliked their rules, resented their expectations, and fought often with his father. Friends and classmates described him as withdrawn, angry, and sometimes violent in his talk. He wasn't an outcast, but he wasn't well-adjusted either. Tension simmered between him and his parents, particularly over religion and discipline. The strictness of the home, combined with David's growing rebellion, created a powder keg waiting to explode. On February 17, 1988, that powder keg finally blew. The day before the murders, David and his father had a heated argument. Accounts vary, but it was said to be over music, religion, and rules in the household. Bernie was frustrated with David's defiance. David, in turn, felt suffocated by his father's authority. That night, David stewed in anger. His resentment had built for months. Now it turned into something darker. In his mind, the only solution was annihilation. In the early hours of February 18, 1988, while his family slept peacefully in their beds, David Brum walked through the quiet house carrying an axe. He first entered his parents' bedroom. Without hesitation, he swung the weapon down on his father, Bernie. The blows were swift, brutal, and merciless. Then he turned the axe on his mother, Paulette, striking her repeatedly as she tried desperately to resist. The sound of violence woke his younger siblings. One by one, David turned on them too. Rick, just a teenager, was killed as he tried to flee. Jean, only 13 years old, was struck down in her bed. Each blow of the axe was delivered with cold finality. When the rampage ended, for members of the Brum family lay dead in their home, their lives extinguished by the very boy they had raised. Only one child survived, Diane, who was not at home that night. The murders shocked Rochester to its core. Friends, neighbors, and classmates couldn't comprehend how such a massacre could happen in their quiet community. Police discovered the gruesome scene after calls of concern from neighbors and teachers who noticed the Brum children absent from school. When officers entered the home, what they found was pure carnage. A family destroyed, a house stained with blood. The question on everyone's lips: where was David? News spread quickly that David was missing. A 16-year-old boy suspected of butchering his family was now on the run. For days, law enforcement scoured the area. Helicopters circled. Roadblocks were set. Fear gripped Rochester. No one knew where David was or what he might do next. But David wasn't far. Just days after the murders, he confided in a friend, admitting what he had done. That friend told a social worker, and soon, police tracked him down. On February 19, 1988, David Brum was arrested without incident. The boy with the axe was now in custody. The legal system now faced a difficult task. David was only 16, a minor, yet his crimes were beyond comprehension. Should he be tried as a juvenile or as an adult? Prosecutors fought hard, arguing that the sheer brutality demanded an adult trial. The defense countered with claims of mental illness and immaturity. In the end, the court ruled that David Brum would be tried as an adult. The trial began in October 1989. Prosecutors painted David as a cold, calculated killer who had slaughtered his family in an act of rage. The defense presented a different narrative, that David was mentally ill, incapable of distinguishing right from wrong, and suffering from psychological disturbances. Expert witnesses debated his state of mind. But the jury, horrified by the details of the murders, was not swayed. On October 16, 1989, David Brum was found guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 40 years, effectively ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. David was sent to the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Stillwater. The Brum murders left Rochester forever scarred. A family once seen as a pillar of faith and stability had been obliterated from within. Classmates of David struggled to process how a boy they had sat next to in school could commit such horror. Teachers and neighbors grappled with the question: were there warning signs we missed? The Catholic community mourned deeply. Church services were held for Bernie, Paulette, Rick, and Jean. Diane, the surviving daughter, faced the unbearable task of burying her parents and siblings, while knowing her brother was the one responsible. David Brum's story remains one of the most chilling examples of familicide in American history. Unlike crimes driven by greed, inheritance, or conspiracy, David's murders seemed fueled by rage, rebellion, and psychological turmoil. He gained nothing from killing his family. No fortune, no freedom, only infamy and a lifetime behind bars. Perhaps that is what makes this case so haunting. It was not about money or power. It was about a teenager's fury, turned into slaughter. In the end, David Brom's name is forever tied to a night of unimaginable violence. For lives ended, a family erased, and a community left to ask the question, how does a child's anger transform into such unthinkable evil? The answer may never be clear, but the horror remains, a reminder that sometimes the darkest storms begin inside the home. A father's love, a mother's care, a brother's bond. These are ties meant to protect us. But what happens when greed burns hotter than blood? When inheritance matters more than life itself? In Manchester, England, one man decided his family's wealth was worth more than his family's breath. And in doing so, he wrote one of the darkest chapters of British crime history. The Seddons were a hard-working family in Sale, Greater Manchester. Robert and Patricia Seddon were kind, caring parents in their 60s. They had dedicated their lives to raising their two children, Stephen and Leslie. But Stephen, their son, was very different from what his parents had hoped. While Robert and Patricia lived modestly, valuing family and stability, Stephen lived recklessly, gambling, spending beyond his means, and constantly chasing shortcuts to wealth. His younger brother Christopher, who had learning disabilities and required special care, was especially close to their parents. He depended on them, and they devoted themselves to protecting him. But for Stephen, his family wasn't a source of love. They were an obstacle, standing between him and the money he felt he deserved. In 2012, Stephen Seddon put his plan into action. His motive? Money. His parents had life insurance policies and owned their home. If they were gone, he stood to inherit a fortune. But Stephen's greed was matched by his cruelty. He didn't just want his parents dead. He also targeted his brother Christopher, who he saw as a burden, a disabled sibling who would also inherit part of the family's estate. Stephen's first attempt was as bizarre as it was sinister. He invited his parents and brother for a drive in a rented car. But instead of a normal family outing, he staged a horrifying crash. He drove the car into a canal, hoping they would drown. Miraculously, Robert, Patricia, and Christopher managed to escape. Struggling in the cold water, they fought their way out of the sinking car and survived. Passers-by helped them to safety. Stephen, pretending to be a victim himself, played the role of the hero, claiming he had tried to save them. For a moment, it seemed like tragedy had been narrowly avoided. But investigators began to notice inconsistencies. Why had Stephen rented the car? Why had he chosen that particular route? Why was his behavior afterward so suspiciously calm? Still, without concrete proof, Stephen walked free. But failure didn't stop him. Instead, it fueled him. Just months later, in July 2012, Stephen carried out his second and deadliest attempt. This time, there would be no canal, no accident. This time, he brought a shotgun. On a quiet summer day, Stephen drove to his parents' house. Inside were Robert, Patricia, and Christopher. They trusted him. After all, he was family. But Stephen entered the home armed. Coldly and methodically, he turned the gun on his parents, shooting them dead. Then, he turned on his disabled brother Christopher, ending his life as well. It was an execution. Fast, ruthless, and without mercy. When the shooting stopped, 3 bodies lay lifeless inside the Seddon family home. Stephen tried to stage the scene to look like a murder-suicide, as if his father Robert had killed Patricia and Christopher before turning the gun on himself. He believed this would protect him from suspicion. But the truth was impossible to hide. Police quickly saw through the deception. Forensics revealed inconsistencies. The angle of the shots, the lack of gunpowder residue on Robert, the stage details. It was clear this was no family suicide. And Stephen's behavior raised further alarm. He was cold, detached, and already asking questions about inheritance. Within days, he was arrested. At trial, prosecutors laid bare Stephen's monstrous greed. They revealed how he had first tried to kill his family in the canal crash, only to succeed later with a shotgun. They painted him as a manipulative liar, a man so consumed by money that he saw his own parents and vulnerable brother as obstacles to be removed. Witnesses testified about his gambling addiction, his financial troubles, and his obsession with the family estate. The most damning evidence came from the forensic reconstruction of the crime scene. It proved beyond doubt that the deaths were deliberate murders, not a tragic family suicide. Stephen Seddon's performance in court did him no favors. He laughed, joked, and even bragged, displaying a chilling lack of remorse. The jury saw through him. In 2013, Stephen Seddon was convicted of 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder for the canal crash. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 40 years. For those who knew the Seddons, the crime was almost impossible to comprehend. Robert and Patricia were loving parents. Christopher was a gentle, vulnerable man who trusted his brother. To think that Stephen had not only betrayed them but had planned their deaths so meticulously shocked the nation. The case became one of the UK's most infamous examples of family annihilation driven by greed. Newspapers branded Stephen the Canal Killer and the Black Sheep Son. For many, the cruelest detail was Christopher's murder. He was completely dependent, trusting his brother without hesitation. Stephen's betrayal of that trust highlighted the depths of his evil. Family crimes always leave behind questions that can never fully be answered. How can a son kill the very parents who gave him life? How can a brother see inheritance, not love, when looking at his sibling? In Stephen Seddon's case, the answer seemed to be pure greed, untempered by conscience. The story of Stephen Seddon is a story of betrayal, a man who valued money over blood, greed over love, inheritance over innocence. In killing his parents and disabled brother, he didn't just destroy a family. He destroyed the very idea of trust within a family home. His name is remembered not with love, but with revulsion. A son who became a killer. They were supposed to be brothers, protectors, playmates, bound by blood. But in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, 2 young brothers became executioners in their own home. What unfolded inside that quiet suburban house in July 2015 was not just a murder. It was a massacre. A plan so cold and calculated, it would come to be known as one of the most horrifying familicides in American history. The Bever family lived on a quiet street in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, a typical middle-class suburb outside of Tulsa. Parents David and April Bever were raising 7 children. To neighbors, they seemed withdrawn, private, even reclusive. The children were homeschooled, rarely seen outside, and family contact with the outside world was limited. Inside the home were David and April, the parents, Robert, 18 years old, Michael, 16 years old, Daniel, 12, Christopher, 7, Victoria, 5, Crystal, 13, and an unborn baby with April pregnant at the time. From the outside, it was just another large, quiet family. But Robert and Michael Bever had been harboring a dark obsession, one that would end in blood. Robert, the eldest son, had grown increasingly fascinated with mass killings. He collected information about school shootings, acts of terrorism, and mass murderers. Online, he researched weapons and survivalist tactics. Michael, his younger brother, idolized Robert and followed his lead. Together, they fed a fantasy of killing, not strangers but their own family. Their plan was not spontaneous. It was calculated, mapped out, and rehearsed. They dreamed of killing their parents and siblings, stealing the family van, and embarking on a nationwide killing spree that, in Robert's words, would rival the deadliest massacres in history. To make it possible, Robert ordered weapons and ammunition online, including knives and tactical gear. The stage was set. That summer night, the Bever home was quiet. Most of the children had gone to bed. But in the darkness, Robert and Michael armed themselves with hunting knives. They were ready to put their plan into action. The first target was their parents. In a sudden explosion of violence, Robert and Michael attacked David and April. The house filled with screams as knives slashed in the night. David fought back, but was overwhelmed. April was stabbed dozens of times as she tried to shield her children. The brothers then turned on their siblings, 12-year-old Daniel, terrified and bleeding, managed to grab a phone and dial 911. His call was desperate but cut short. The dispatcher heard only gasps and screams before the line went dead. Robert and Michael found Daniel, dragged him back, and stabbed him to death. Crystal, the 13-year-old sister, tried to fight back. She was stabbed but survived by playing dead. Her bravery and quick thinking would later prove critical. 7-year-old Christopher and 5-year-old Victoria were not spared. Both were stabbed to death, their small bodies unable to withstand the brothers' frenzy. By the time the night ended, 5 members of the Bever family lay dead. Against all odds, 2 of the children survived. Crystal, the 13-year-old sister, though gravely wounded, lived. Her testimony would later provide chilling details of the massacre. And the youngest, a 2-year-old baby girl, was found in her crib unharmed, spared either by accident or oversight. The survival of these children meant that the Bever brothers' plan to wipe out their entire family was incomplete. When police arrived after Daniel's interrupted 911 call, they were met with a scene of pure horror. The house was soaked in blood. Bodies lay scattered in bedrooms and hallways. The sheer brutality stunned even seasoned officers. Police quickly realized this was not the work of an intruder. The killers were still inside, and they were family. Robert and Michael were found covered in blood, attempting to flee into the woods behind their home. They were arrested on the spot. In custody, the Bever brothers showed no remorse. Robert, in particular, spoke with chilling calm. He admitted to planning the murders for months. He described the killings in detail, explaining how they wanted to become infamous mass murderers. Detectives were horrified. This wasn't an act of desperation or sudden rage. It was premeditated, methodical, and carried out with cold precision. Robert smiled as he recounted the attack. He spoke about how the killings had felt, how he had looked into his siblings' eyes as he stabbed them. His lack of empathy was staggering. The Bever brothers were charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder. Michael, only 16 at the time, was tried as an adult. His defense argued that he had been manipulated by his older brother, that Robert was the mastermind. Robert, however, embraced his role. He openly admitted his desire to kill, even boasting about it in jail. In 2016, Robert Bever pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without parole. Michael went to trial in 2018. Despite arguments about his youth and Robert's influence, the jury convicted him of 5 counts of first-degree murder. He too was sentenced to life without parole. After the trial, the Bever family home became a chilling reminder of the massacre. Neighbors pushed for it to be torn down. In 2019, the house was demolished, replaced with a memorial garden. The site that once held the blood of a family now serves as a quiet place for reflection, a symbol of a community's resilience in the face of horror. Crystal, who survived despite her injuries, testified courageously against her brothers. Her strength ensured justice was done. The youngest sibling, who was just a baby at the time, was later placed into care. She would grow up away from the shadow of the massacre, too young to remember the bloodshed that wiped out her family. The Broken Arrow massacre shocked not just Oklahoma, but the entire nation. People struggled to comprehend how 2 brothers, teenagers, could turn their knives on their parents, their siblings, and their own flesh and blood. What made it more chilling was the brothers' motive. Not money, not anger, but a twisted desire for infamy. Robert and Michael Bever wanted to be remembered as killers. Instead, they are remembered as monsters who destroyed their own family. The massacre in Broken Arrow reminds us of the darkest truth, that sometimes evil is not born outside the home. Sometimes it grows quietly within, fed by obsession, fantasy, and the absence of conscience. And when it finally erupts, it spares no one, not even the innocent faces of a brother or sister who once trusted you.